Reading through the Bible in 1 year, July 25th, Judges chapter 8, Acts 12, Jeremiah 21, and Mark chapter 7. Then the men of Ephraim said to him, "What is this thing you have done to us, not calling us when you went to fight against Midian?" And they strongly contended with him. But he said to them, "What have I done now in comparison with you? Is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the grape harvest of Abiezer? And God has given the princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb, into your hands. And what was I able to do in comparison with you?" Then their anger toward him subsided when he spoke this word. Then Gideon and the 300 men who were with him came to the Jordan and crossed over, weary yet pursuing. And he said to the men of Succoth, "Please give loaves of bread to the people who are following me, for they are weary. And I am pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian." But the princes of Succoth said, "Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hands, that we should give bread to your army?" Basically saying, look, I don't think you can defeat them. And Gideon said, "Thus, when Yahweh has given Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, then I will thrash your bodies with the thorns of the wilderness and with briars." So he went up from there to Penuel, and spoke similarly to them. The men of Penuel answered and said to them just as the men of Succoth had answered. So he spoke to the men of Penuel, saying, "When I return safely, I will tear down this tower." Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor, and their camps with them, about 15,000 men, all who were left of the entire camp of the sons of the east. For the fallen were 120,000 men who drew the sword. Now, and Gideon went up by the way of those who dwelt in tents on the east of Nobah and Jogabah, and struck the camp when the camp was unsuspecting. Then Zebah and Zalmunna fled, and he pursued them and captured the 2 kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, and threw the whole camp into utter fright. Then Gideon, the son of Joash, returned from the battle by the ascent of Heres, and he captured a youth from the men of Succoth and questioned him. So the youth wrote down for him the princes of Succoth and its elders, 77 men. Then he came to the men of Succoth and said, "Behold, Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you reproach me, saying, Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give bread to your men who are weary?" Then he took the elders of that city, as well as the thorns of the wilderness and briars, and with them he taught the men of Succoth a lesson. And he tore down the tower of Penuel and killed the men of the city. Then he said to Zebah and Zalmunna, "What kind of men were they whom you killed at Tabor?" And they said, "They were like you, each one resembling the son of a king." See if there's a note in here for that. Not really. Okay, let's continue on. Verse 19. And he said, "They were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As Yahweh lives, if only you had let them live, I would not kill you." So he said to Jether, his firstborn, "Rise, kill them." But the youth did not draw his sword, for he was afraid, because he was still a youth. Then Zebah and Zalmunna said, "Rise up yourself and smite us, for as the man, so is his might." So Gideon arose and killed Zebah and Zalmunna, and took the crescent ornaments which are on their camels' necks. Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, "Rule over us, both you and your son, and also your son's son, for you have saved us from the hand of Midian," saying, "Become a king." But Gideon said to them, "I will not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. Yahweh shall rule over you." Yet Gideon said to them, "I would make one request of you, that each of you give me an earring from his spoil," for they had gold earrings, because they were Ishmaelites. And they said, "We will surely give them." So they spread out a garment, and every one of them threw an earring there from his spoil. And the weight of the gold earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold, besides the crescent ornaments and the pendants and the purple robes which were on the kings of Midian, and beside the neckbands that were on their camels' necks. Then Gideon made it into an ephod, and placed it in his seat Ophrah. Again, remember an ephod is something used to, um, basically it's a good way to put it is armor before God. This is not something he should have done, right? It represents him as a high priest, basically. And all Israel played the harlot with it there, so that it became a snare to Gideon and to his household. So Midian was subdued before the sons of Israel, and they did not lift up their heads anymore. And the land was quiet for 40 years in the days of Gideon. Then Jerubbaal, Gideon, the son of Joash, went and lived in his own house. Now Gideon had 70 sons who were his direct descendants, for he had many wives. And his concubine, who was in Shechem, also bore him a son, and named him Abimelech, which means son of the king. Then Gideon, the son of Joash, died at a good old age, and he was buried in the tomb of his father Joash, in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. Then it happened, as soon as Gideon was dead, that the sons of Israel turned back and played the harlot with the Baals, and made Baal-berith their god. Thus the sons of Israel did not remember Yahweh their God, who had delivered them from the hands of all their enemies on every side. Nor did they show loving kindness to the house of Jerubbaal, that is, Gideon, in accord with all the good that he had done to Israel. Let's move on now to Acts chapter 12. Now, about that time, Herod the king laid hands on some who belonged to the church in order to harm them. And he had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. When he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to arrest Peter also. Now it was during the days of unleavened bread. When he had seized him, he put him in prison, delivering him to 4 squads of soldiers to guard him, intending after the Passover to bring him out before the people. So Peter was kept in the prison, but prayer for him was being made fervently by the church of God, rather by the church to God. Now, on the very night when Herod was about to bring him forward, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers, bound with 2 chains, and guards in front of the door were watching over the prison. And behold, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared, and a light shone in the cell. And he struck Peter's side and woke him up, saying, "Rise up quickly." And his chains fell off his hands. And the angel said to him, "Gird yourself and put on your sandals." And he did so. And he said to him, "Wrap your garment around yourself and follow me." And he went out and continued to follow. And he did not know that what was being done by the angel was real, but was thinking he was seeing a vision. When they had passed the first and second guard post, they came to the iron gate that leads into the city, which opened for them by itself. And they went out and went along one street, and immediately the angel departed from him. When Peter came to himself, he said, "Now truly I know that the Lord has sent his angel and rescued me from the hand of Herod, and from all that the Jewish people were expecting." When he realized this, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, who was also called Mark, where many were gathered together and were praying. And when he knocked at the door of the gate, a servant girl named Rhoda came to answer. When she recognized Peter's voice, because of her joy, she did not open the gate, but ran in and reported that Peter was standing in front of the gate. And they said to her, You are out of your mind." But she kept insisting that it was so, and they kept saying, "It is his angel." But Peter continued knocking. When they opened the door, they saw him and were astounded. But motioning to them with his hand to be silent, he recounted to them how the Lord had led him out of the prison. And he said, "Report these things to James and the brothers." Then he left and went to another place. Now, when day came, there was no small disturbance among the soldiers as to what had become of Peter. And when Herod had searched for him and had not found him, he examined the guards in order that they should be led away to execution. And then he went down from Judea to Caesarea and was spending time there. Now, he was very angry with the people of Tyre and Sidon, and with one accord they came to him, having won over Blastus, the king's chamberlain. And they were asking for peace because their country was fed by the king's country. And on an appointed day, Herod, having put on his royal apparel and sitting on the judgment seat, began delivering an address to them. And all the assembly kept crying out, "The voice of a god and not of a man." And immediately an angel of the Lord struck him, because he did not give God the glory. And he was eaten by worms and breathed his last. But the word of the Lord continued to grow and to be multiplied. And Barnabas and Saul returned to Jerusalem, fulfilling their ministry, taking along with them John, who was also called Mark. That is all the notes to here. Let's go on to Jeremiah 21. The word which came to Jeremiah from Yahweh, when King Zedekiah sent to him Pashur, the son of Malchijah, and Zephaniah the priest, son of Maaseiah, saying, "Please inquire of Yahweh on our behalf. For Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, is warring against us. Perhaps Yahweh will deal with us according to all his wonderful acts, so that the enemy will go up from us." Then Jeremiah said to them, "Thus you shall say to Zedekiah, Thus says Yahweh, the God of Israel, Behold, I am about to turn back the weapons of war which are in your hands, with which you are warring against the king of Babylon and the Chaldeans who are besieging you outside the wall, and I will gather them into the center of this city. I myself will war against you with an outstretched hand and a strong arm, even in anger and wrath and great indignation. I will also strike down the inhabitants of this city, both man and beast, and they will die of a great pestilence." Sword, pestilence. "Then afterward, declares Yahweh, I will give over Zedekiah, king of Judah, and his servants and the people, even those who remain in the city from the pestilence, the sword, and the famine, the threefold destruction of God, into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and into the hand of their enemies, and into the hand of those who seek their lives. And he will strike them down with the edge of the sword. He will not show pity on them, nor spare, nor have compassion. You shall say this to this people. Rather, you shall also say to this people, Thus says Yahweh, Behold, I have set before you the way of life and the way of death. He who inhabits this city will die by the sword and by famine and by pestilence, the threefold destruction of God. But he who goes out and falls away to the Chaldeans who are besieging you will live, and he will have his own life as spoil. This is super important. This is going to be repeated throughout the next few next few chapters we're going through. God is telling the people specifically, look, the Chaldeans are outside Jerusalem. Jerusalem will not survive this. A lot of you will die. You're going to be walled up in here. Nobody can come in. Everything's going to be blocked off. You're going to have a lack of food. That's your famine. You're going to have pestilence because of the fact that no one can enter or exit the city, so sickness will be running rampant. And also when people die, they're dead inside the city with all of you. So this is going to be real bad for you. Anybody who goes out in war, if you go out with a weapon in your hand, you're going to die by the sword. This is going to be utterly terrible for you. So instead, I have chosen to give you, my people, into the hand of the Chaldeans and into the hand of King Nebuchadnezzar from Babylon. And you will go out to him, and he will save you. This comes up in an amazing letter in Jeremiah 29, which we're going to get to, of the people who were sent away captive to Babylon from Jerusalem. We're going to see that take place because of those who went in peace. But if you stay in the city, the only thing that's left for you is death and destruction. That's what he's saying here. I have set before you the way of life and the way of death. Verse 9. And he who inhabits this city will die by the sword and by famine and by pestilence. But he who goes out and falls away to the Chaldeans who are besieging you will live and will have his own life as spoil. This is super important. Remember it throughout the rest of this book. For I have set my face against this city for evil and not for good, declares Yahweh. And it will be given into the hand of the king of Babylon, and he will burn it with fire. Then say to the household of the king of Judah, hear the word of Yahweh. O house of David, thus says Yahweh, render justice every morning, and deliver the person who has been robbed from the power of his oppressor, lest my wrath go forth like fire, and burn with none to extinguish it, because of the evil of their deeds. Behold, I am against you, O inhabitant of the valley, O rocky plain, declares Yahweh. You men who say, who will come down against us? Or who will enter our dwelling places? But I will punish you according to the results of your deeds, declares Yahweh. And I will kindle a fire in its forest, that it may devour all its surroundings. Let's conclude today in Mark chapter 7. And the Pharisees and some of the scribes gathered around Jesus when they had come from Jerusalem. They had seen some of his disciples were eating their bread with defiled, that is, unwashed, hands. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they carefully, ceremonially wash their hands, thus observing the traditions of the elders. This isn't something commanded by God, this is just a tradition that's been handed down. And when they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash themselves. And there are many other things which they have received in order to observe, such as the washing of cups and pitchers and copper pots. And the Pharisees and the scribes asked Jesus, why do your disciples not walk according to the tradition of the elders, but eat their bread with defiled hands? And he said to them, rightly did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites. As it is written, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far away from me. But in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commands of men. Leaving the commandment of God, you hold to the tradition of men. He was also saying to them, you are good at setting aside the commandment of God in order to keep your tradition. For Moses said, honor your father and your mother, and he who speaks evil of father or mother is to be put to death. But you say, if a man says to his father or his mother, whatever you might benefit from me is Corban, that is to say, given to God. You no longer leave him to do anything for his father or his mother, thus invalidating the word of God by your tradition, which you have handed down. And you do many things such as that. What is this? We've talked about it before. This is the fifth commandment, which is to honor your father and mother, which means that as your parents raised you and took care of you, so you also, as your parents get old and can no longer care for themselves, you bring them into your home and you take care of them and their needs. This allows you to have a multi-generational household where your parents help you raise your children in the fear and admonition of the Lord. And also, it allows you to give back to them what they have given to you. This is why it comes with a blessing. But what they were doing is they were telling the people, so they could get some money, you don't have to worry about, let us do that. Let the church take care of it for you. Think of it as welfare. You give money to the government, and the government takes care of meeting the needs of the people, so you don't have to be burdened with it. It just comes out of your taxes. Well, this removes from you the ability to serve God in the way that you are supposed to by honoring that fifth commandment. This is what we see here. This is what they were doing. They were turning the word of God and rejecting it so that they could basically just get the money from the people and divvy it up as they decided. Verse 14, and after he called the crowd to him again, he began saying to them, listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside the man which can defile him if it goes into him, but things which proceed out of the man are what defile the man. We're at some square brackets. We've talked about this before. Whenever we see these square brackets, what it means is that we've encountered a section of text which is not found in the oldest and most reliable manuscripts that we have, parchments and so forth. So this is something that was most often added after the fact as either a scribal note or something that was similar in another gospel account and was added in, right? We put the best construction on everything. None of these things change the meaning of the text. None of these things change anything that should be, that we learn about who God is because of this, right? So when we see this, the reason why it's here and it's in those brackets is so that as we read the text, we can recognize it and go, I probably shouldn't base my entire theology on this piece of text. We come to a much larger section of this as we get to the end of Mark. But what we're going to do is we're going to read verse 15, 16, the disputed verse, and then 17. And then we'll read 15 again, skipping 16 and go right to 17. Let's begin. I'm going to roll back to 14 because it'll make it easier, make more sense of it. And after he called the crowd to him again, he began speaking to them. Listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside the man which can defile him if it goes into him, but the things which proceed out of the man are that which defile him. And if anyone has ears to hear, let him hear. And when he had left the crowd and entered the house, his disciples were asking him about the parable. Back to verse 14. And after he called the crowd to him again, he began saying to them, listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside the man which can defile him if it goes into him, but the things which proceed out of the man are what defile the man. When he had left the crowd and entered the house, his disciples were asking him about the parable. And he said to them, are you lacking in understanding in this way as well? Do you not understand that whatever goes into the man from the outside cannot defile him? We're talking food, right? Because it does not go into his heart, doesn't go into your soul, but it goes into your stomach and goes into the sewer. Thus he declared all foods clean. He was saying, that which proceeds out of the man, that is what defiles the man. For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed the evil thoughts, sexual immoralities, thefts, murders, adulteries, coveting, wickedness, deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, and foolishness. All these evil things proceed from within and defile the man. Now Jesus stood up and went away from there into the region of Tyre. When he had entered a house, he was wanting no one to know of it, and yet he could not escape notice. But after hearing of him, a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately came and fell at his feet. Now the woman was a Greek of Syrophoenician descent, and she kept asking him to cast the demon out of her daughter. And he was saying to her, let the children be satisfied first, for it is not good to take the children's bread and to throw it to the dogs. But she answered and said to him, yes, Lord. But even the dogs under the table feed on the children's crumbs. And he said to her, because of this answer, go, the demon has gone out of your daughter. And going back to her home, she found the child lying on the bed, the demon having left. And again he went out from the region of Tyre and came through Sidon to the Sea of Galilee, within the region of the Decapolis. And they brought to him one who was deaf and spoke with difficulty, and they pleaded with him to lay his hand on him. And Jesus took him aside from the crowd, by himself, and put his fingers into his ears, and after spitting, he touched his tongue. And looking up to heaven with a sigh, he said to him, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. And his ears were opened, and the impediment on his tongue was removed, and he began speaking plainly. And he gave orders not to tell anyone, but the more he was ordering them, the more widely they continued to proclaim it. And they were utterly astonished, saying, he has done all things well. He makes even the deaf to hear and the mute to speak. That's it. That's all the text. That is all of the notes, and that is all for today. God willing, we'll be back tomorrow. Behold, the word of the Lord.